Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Anna Summers and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar will be on, I forgot to share my screen again. Okay, our next webinar will be on March 17th, A Fresh Slate on Newspapers with Dave Obey. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Maureen Brady, who will be giving a presentation on what's in a name. And then Maureen Brady is a former school librarian and computer educator. She has over 35 years experience with family history research. She has traced her Scottish roots back to the end of the 17th century and beyond, and also has pursued Chicago and the Midwest, the Trans-Allegheny, US, Quebec, Irish, and Swedish research. Maureen has made numerous presentations to Illinois and Wisconsin Genealogical Societies, libraries, conferences, and workshops, including presenting at the 2002 National Genealogical Society Conference in the States and the 2016, 17, and 2018 Central Florida Family History Conference. She is a member of the Genealogical Speakers Guild, as well as a life member of the Aberdeen and Northeast Scotland Family History Society, the Chicago Genealogical Society, the Ohio Genealogy Society, and the McHenry County, Illinois Genealogical Society. She's also active in the British Interest Group of Wisconsin and Illinois Bigwell, the Chicago Scots Genealogical Group, and the Lake County, Illinois Genealogical Society. And Maureen, if you're ready, we'll turn the time over to you.
Okay, and I will share a screen. Okay, and we go here, share, and there. This is the time when I'm always a little finger crossed. Come on, share. There it goes. Okay, so we're going to talk tonight about what's in a name, and both of these words are spelled correctly. The QUH is a very early form in English of the WH sound. And then obviously the Y added into the word name was also very early used to just give the sound of the AY, the long A sound, and then variants on the word brown. One of the problems we have with family history research is that before the 20th century, name spelling was not very standardized, nor for that matter were place name spellings. So we're going to talk about that tonight and give you some ideas, I hope, as to how you can solve some of these issues when you can't find them in a census or a record. First of all, we're going to talk about or get the definition for a name, the word name. This is from dictionary.com. And a name is a word or a combination of words. So think given name, middle name, surname, by which a person, place, or thing, a body or class, or any object of thought is designated, called, or known. So it doesn't have to be a living person. It can be any object. It can even be a school of thought or a theory or something like that. It can also be an appellation, title, or epithet applied descriptively in honor or abuse or any variant of that sort. So it doesn't even have to be a positive name. It can have negative connotations. Just to give us an idea of what that word actually represents. We're first going to look at most frequent origins of surnames. Now, I am noting the name frequent, the word frequent, because these are only 4. There are some other ways that we get our surnames, but these are the most frequent worldwide and in most cultures. And we're going to go rather quickly tonight because it's only an hour and there's a lot to cover. First of all, surnames can come from an occupation. So examples of those surnames are Smith, Cooper and Fisher, a blacksmith, one who made barrels and one who fished for a living. Very obvious origins for those names. Personal description, the way someone looked, would often give them a nickname, which eventually became a surname. So we have two here as examples. Wieskopf from the German, which translates in English as Whitehead, and Cameron, which is a Gaelic, an English spelling of the Gaelic word, which meant crooked nose. So the original Cameron in the Cameron clan possibly had a crooked nose, or someone just before him. The location that someone was from. So we have two examples. Now, a lot of my examples you'll see are from the British Isles, because that's where most of my family, in fact, that's where all of my family is from. And so it's where most of my examples are from, but there's some others in here too. But we have the very common Scottish name, Bruce, Robert the Bruce, who was considered to be one of the great patriots of Scotland. And his name actually is from Brus, which is a French region, and it meant that the person was from or of that French region, Bru. Wallace is from someone who was from or of Wales, and eventually that was spelled as Wallace. Patronymics, the practice of giving you your surname based on the given name of your father. So we have a wonderful picture here of 4 generations of men. And here's some examples. Usually it has an S-E-N, S-O-N for the males, or some version of the word daughter. This is from Swedish. This is Gaelic. This is actually a Welsh Gaelic, where instead of putting it at the end, it's a word in front, A-B. And the same thing in regular Gaelic, only in this case, it's M-A-C. So this is son of Donald, son of Owen, daughter of Olaf, son of Robert, and son of Soren. And you can see how that is organized. Now, the thing with patronymics is each generation had a different surname based on their father's given name. So you could have a Robert Sorensen, whose children were Robertsons, and if one of them was an Olaf and he had a daughter, she could be Olaf's daughter. This could be grandfather, father, and daughter, but because the patronymic changes each generation, it is going to be different. This was true in Scandinavia until about the 1880s. It is still the form of surnames in Iceland. Then we have the origins of given names and forenames. Now, we only talked about 4 of the frequent uses of how we got our surname: an occupation, a description, a location, or a patronymic. But now we get into the varieties of the ways we were given our given names or forenames. That is, the names given to us personally by our parents. One of the main ways for most religions has been from the scripture of that faith. So we have the Bible and the Book of Mormon and the scrolls of Judaism, and then this is the Quran. So, and those were just some. I just picked the 4 that were most obvious. So here are some examples. We have Jeremiah and Ruth from the Bible and from the Book of Mormon. We have Muhammad from the Quran, Alma from the Book of Mormon, and Sariah, which is from all of those faiths. It represents a very ancient wife and prophetess, actually. And so her name occurs in all forms of those 4 main faiths. Another way to get your given name is by your family naming you after a famous person, perhaps an important figure at the time you're born, or a saint's name, especially from the Catholic religion. So we have Oliver Hazard Perry Foster, named after one of the patriots and heroes of the War of 1812. We have Ulysses Grant Lott, named after not only the president, but before that, he was a famous general from the Civil War. And then we have Teresa Olga Roberts. Both Teresa and Olga are names of saints. So you can see where these 3 names were built from. And yes, these are all real people. Then we have family names, where we go back in time to the grandparents' generation, or perhaps even to the great-grandparents' generation, to the aunts and uncles and so forth. One of the common ways that many families named their sons particularly, but all of their children, and I gave you the breakout in your handout so you can understand the process. Now, this isn't everybody. This is not every family. It isn't even all siblings within a family, but it is very, very common, and common enough that it often gives us very difficulty breaking out which branch of a family we need to use. So generation one is a William Hunter. He's born in the 1700s and he has a rather large family. His first son, William Hunter, in generation two is also given the name William, but that William may not be named after his father, but rather a grandfather before that. We don't know because we can only go back to generation one. But if you look at generation three, another William, but this William is named for this William up here in generation one after the paternal grandfather. Generation four does the same thing, naming William after his paternal grandfather, the one here in generation two. And finally, we have William Hunter in the fifth generation, but he is also named after his paternal grandfather, the one here in generation three. This is actually my family. This is my mother's brother, and then my grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, and three great-grandfathers. 4 grandfathers in a row, William, and then an Uncle William, all of them named after the grandfather, except this one we don't know because we don't know the previous generation. I hope that made sense because I went through it very quickly. Another way to get our given name is from special association, and it's sometimes called the fan club for friends, acquaintances, and neighbors. People that live around your family, that your family have associations with, or have some sort of connection to. So we have doctors, and we have the neighbors, and we have the minister. So one of the ones in my family that threw us for a loop for quite a long time, it's the only child in the family with a middle name, and it was John Matheson Forsyth. And we spent more than a decade trying to solve why he had a middle name and none of the rest of his siblings did. And eventually we discovered that John Matheson was named after the minister who baptized him, named John Matheson. And that minister, this baby, was his first baptism after he was ordained a minister. So of course it made perfect sense for the family to name that little baby after this minister performing his first baptism. Then we have current trends, the names that are stylish at the time. So currently with my family, we have Sydneys, Becketts, and Olivers. Over time, that could have been Marys and Joyces, and it could have been almost anything, whatever may have been popular, named after a movie star or someone important in the news or whatever. So those are how we got our given names. And there's other ways, of course, but those are the main ones. But why can't we find them? We know the name. We know their names from either a late census or from a death certificate or an obituary or something of that sort. But then when we go to look for records, we can't find them. So let's look at why. Most of the reasons, again, these are not exclusive. First thing is, who's creating the record you're looking for? Is it someone who speaks the language of the person giving the information? Or is it a foreign, in quotes, recorder? So again, from my Scottish British references, if I have a Scot who normally speaks Doric, which is the northeast of Scotland and is quite a different language from English, and he is speaking to someone who comes from Oxford University, will that recorder understand what that speaker is saying to him when he writes down the information on the record? And most recorders probably, we're assuming, never asked for clarification or to be sure they were hearing properly. So here we have a very popular name, especially in Ireland, Patrick. He is a saint as well, so there's a lot of people who have this name. But in Gaelic, if you say the name in Gaelic, it sounds like Peter. So a recorder who is not familiar with Gaelic would hear the word Patrick spoken as Peter and would write this down in the record. Now, these are the same people, person. They mean the same exact thing. This is Gaelic, this is English. But if you're looking for this name and you can't find it, go look for Peter. Or if you find a record with Peter and everything fits except the first name, it is probably him because that is a translation of Patrick. The record itself is not in English. A lot of church records are in Latin, especially as we go back in time before the Reformation or even in the early part of the Reformation. So here's a look at some names and then we'll see what usually when I'm live, I ask you to tell me what that is. But Jacobus, which is Latin, in English is James. Guglielmus in Latin becomes William. Etienne in French is Stephen. Mies is a Flemish name, which is Belgium and the Netherlands. That's Bartholomew. You notice that that's a biblical name that becomes this in another language. Luba in Ukrainian, and I didn't pick this because of the situation. This is an old friend of mine who became Lucy when she became a US citizen. And then we have Kaisa, Scandinavian, and is often translated as Catherine or Kathleen. So if you're looking for a Stephen and you're in French records and you can't find Stephen, that's because you need to look for Etienne. So you need to find these out, and I'll show you later the best website for these first names. Then we have the recorders who use shorthand, either because they want to do it quickly or because they don't want to use a lot of their ink. So we have JNO for John and GEO for George, and this is one form of the short for William. These are obvious, but sometimes the abbreviations aren't so obvious, and that's when you need to start looking at using wildcards or little replacements, so J apostrophe, J asterisk, or whatever the website might call, and we'll talk about that later too. Then we have what I call the lazy recorder, the one who just doesn't want to take the time to write out the full name, and he's just going to write it in a short form. So that Oliver Perry Foster is very often written as O.P. Foster, just because that's shorter and easier to write. And then I have a cousin who is William Washburn Duncan. And again, most of the time, and even into his obituary, he is just W.W. Duncan. So you do have to think about this. Sometimes we need to just not think about the name, but the initials and then wildcards to help us find them. Then we have historical and cultural variations. So we have historical spelling patterns. So here's the name White, very common. But as we go back in time, that I is actually a Y, as in name. And as we even go further back, remember I said that WH was QUH in the Middle Ages. And so white pronounced exactly the same as this word up here. But as we go back, we have to adjust how we think that word might be spelled. We also have to deal with silent letters. So here we have a Gaelic word with a silent B, and it's pronounced do. So think about this. You have a recorder listening to someone who speaks Gaelic, but they themselves don't understand Gaelic or know how it's spelled. And so they hear them say the name do, and they write it D-E-W as they would hear it in English. Same thing with bow with the silent G. That's one of our problems even in English. So you do have to think about silent letters. Think always, how does that name sound? And sometimes that's difficult to determine. Also known as, so in French, up in Quebec, we have a common form of a name that includes the D-I-T, the D name. So here we have Joseph Jarret de Beauregard, but in the actual records, all of these forms of his name were recorded. Sometimes just Joseph Jarret, and they just skipped the rest of it. Sometimes they did Joseph Beauregard, the first and last part, and sometimes they did the whole thing. It becomes very difficult in French records. The records are fantastic. It's easy to trace, but you have to be aware that Joseph Jarret could be Joseph Jarret de Beauregard, or it could be a different Joseph Jarret, but it's worth following up when you find variants that are part of the full name. Another example, in the northeast of Scotland, in the fishing villages, the villages do not have a lot of people, never have, and so there's very few surnames within the village. So here we have a John Cowie, and there are 5 John Cowies in the village, all of approximately the same age. So they adopted a system that is called 2 or T names, and I'm not sure where that came from, but they're called T names usually. And so we have John Cowie, Carrot, and this is exactly how it's written in the records, even in the census. John Cowie, parentheses, Carrot. John Cowie, parentheses, Bullen. Now, most of the time, this parenthesis name word refers to the name of their ship, their little boat, their fishing boat, or it could be a description of them. Maybe John Cowie was a carrot head, and this John Cowie had the ship Bullen. But these T names in these little fishing villages help to differentiate between all the various Cowie families that live in that little town. And it's used for all of the surnames in that fishing village. This is just one example. Most villages that are short on numbers of surnames, where there may only be 4 or 5, develop their own little system in the records to keep track of which is which. And you need to be aware of that and then start to become familiar with them. Then we have spelling. There was no such thing as spelling. As a volunteer at a family history center, I get a lot of times first-time patrons coming in and saying, well, it was always spelled that way. No, it wasn't. Our spelling was not standardized until around World War I, when the government got into it and started making military records and things of that sort, and they wanted one common way to spell a name. So spelling simply did not exist. It was always, how do I hear it and how do I feel like spelling it right now? I actually have a document where the man's last name is Smith, and he signs his name 3 times on the same page, and each time he spells it differently. This is from the 1870s. So it doesn't matter. These are all Johnson. Even though they look like they might be from different ethnic groups, they could always all be the same Johnson in England or the same Johnson in Sweden. It's almost impossible to know because the spellings were so different. So that runs us into index or interpretations as well. Here's an example from the 1940 census. And this is in Chicago, Illinois. And we have a family with an Andrew and a Catherine and Eileen and George and Laverne. Now, very clear to read, but the ancestry index, look at the box, there's the surname. I want to take a second for you to look at that and see how you think that word is spelled. What is this surname, particularly that first letter? Do you see this? Or do you see this? Now, once you know that it's Andrew Kerber, the K becomes somewhat obvious. And even that little tail should have given it away. But Ancestry has indexed it as Lerber. So be aware of what does the indexer say, even with what appears to be fairly clear handwriting. They all don't disagree necessarily on what those letters represent. Then we have the I'd rather be's, people who adopt other names for themselves. So in my family, Brady family, Henry Michael is my great-grandfather, and Hugh Frederick is his brother. They were both born in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Their parents stayed in Kenosha and both died there. But neither Henry nor Hugh stayed in Kenosha as they became adults. So in 1860, when they were living with mom and dad, they are listed in the census as Michael and Frederick. So apparently mom and dad used their middle names. This is an Irish family with very German names, which is really puzzles to me, but they use these middle names. So the boys are listed as Michael and Frederick. But after the Civil War, as they grew up and got married, when I look at 1900 and all of the censuses after the Civil War, they are Henry and Hugh or H. Frederick. Sometimes he does that. So the boys apparently didn't really want to be called Michael and Frederick. They rather would have their first real names, and they started to use that. Now, as I went back in time, this became an issue because I thought, well, that's not Henry and Hugh. That's a different family entirely. And I spent a long time trying to find Henry and Hugh. And only when I actually found death certificates was I able to determine that they were Michael and Frederick. Sometimes you cannot answer these puzzles quickly. It will take research, it will take patience, it will take time. Then we have nicknames for people. Now, again, I would have you guess if we were live in person, but Dicey is very common in the South and usually is a Francis. Excuse me, she doesn't start even with the letter D. Why Dicey? Why Francis became Dicey? I don't know. There's usually family stories behind it or traditions out of a particular area, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, but those stories have disappeared. We have Dowd. This is one of my great uncles, Uncle Dowd. It's what I called him my entire life, even when he was an adult, but in his later years and I was an adult, he's a George. Now, where does that come from? We have Rab, one of his brothers, Dowd's brother Rab, who's actually an Oliver. Mary, now that seems rather common, doesn't it? Why would you have another name for Mary? Well, in the South, very often she's Polly. Even for those coming into Ohio from Pennsylvania, she's Polly. Nancy has a lot of variants, but one of the most common ones is Agnes or Nellie. Agnes, if you say it in a certain way with a certain kind of accent, it sounds like Nancy. And then Nellie can also be Helen, but it can also be Nancy. And then one of my favorites is an Irish name, Bridget. And I have question marks because that's both a nickname and a given name. So when you see it for an Irish girl, we don't know if that's a nickname for her, like she's really Mary, but being called Bridget, or she's really a Bridget. And there's no way except to look in the records and keep looking in the records to determine if that is a nickname or not. One of my favorites is my father's aunt, Aunt Pat. She was how everyone referred to her in the family. By the time I was born, she was gone, but everybody talked about Aunt Pat, including my dad. So I spent a very, very long time, over 20 years, trying to figure out who Aunt Pat was. I never found a Pat in the census with the family. I did not find births, baptisms, deaths, marriages, nothing of that sort. But everybody kept insisting there was an Aunt Pat. Well, then eventually I connected with another branch of the family that over time we had been disconnected from. And they lived in Indiana. And I'm talking to that cousin one day and we talk about Aunt Pat. I asked her, do you know who Aunt Pat was? Well, it turns out Aunt Pat on her baptismal record was Alice Edna. On her marriage record and death certificate, she is Alice Edna. On all the censuses, she's Edna, but the family called her Aunt Pat. This makes no sense to me, and you can see why it took me over 20 years to find her, and it only happened because I connected with a cousin. So putting your trees out makes a lot of sense so that somebody can find you and solve these mysteries for you. And what did you say? Remember I said that most recorders took it orally. They didn't ask you how to spell or confirm spelling. So there is a common, this is a friend of mine. She has German ancestry. And this is the name. And the person was born in Prussia and pronounced it Jost here in Chicago. Jost and born in Prussia. Well, in the 18th, took her a long time, but in the 1871 census, she found a Roost born in Russia, and the names, ages, and address were all correct for the man Jost and his family. So the census enumerator heard Roost when the man from Germany, Prussia, said the name Jost. Isn't even the first letter the same? She found this only by going page by page through the Chicago census for the area where the family lived. You can see what the problem was, but all of the names, ages, and address were correct. So with some certainty, we are fairly certain that the roost is Jost. Then we have Carney. My great-grandparents, that Uncle Dode, he married a Carney girl, and he called her that, the Carney girl. Well, the actual spelling of her surname is Cardno, with the silent D from the Gaelic, probably, and then the NO becoming an NY sound. So that spelling was said this way. It would be very difficult for you to make that connection, but you could search by the wild cards after the CAR. You'd get a lot of hits, but you might find it very quickly. And then we have plain outright mistakes. I had a great uncle, another great uncle, brother to Dode and Rab, and his full name was John Forsyth Robertson. And in Scottish tradition, especially in those earlier generations, when you asked someone their name, they gave you their full name. So whenever someone asked Uncle John his name, it was John Forsyth Robertson. Very proud of that Forsyth because that was his mother's maiden name. In the 1940 census, I knew exactly where he lived. I had been to that house. I knew the street address and all of that, but I could not find him. His family, his wife is Laura. He had a Jan and a John and a Janet as his children. So it was very, very difficult. So finally I did an ED search, which you can do if you know the street address and can figure it out from either Stephen Morse's site or there's some other map sites that can help. I finally figured out the ED and went through it page by page. And instead of John Forsyth Robertson, the census enumerator wrote John R. Forsyth, which of course it makes it perfectly clear why I could never find John Robertson because it was John Forsyth. So sometimes it's a shared mistake, and the only way you're going to solve this kind of problem is to work through other methods or just by accident. Usually what it means is a page by page through the census or the church record or whatever. So let's look at some research strategies. First of all, and this is the main one, do not make assumptions about anything, about a person's first name, about a person's spelling of that name, even what a nickname might stand for. As an example, once upon a time, I had a client and we were trying to find an Ed Harris. All of the records that I had access to at the beginning of the research had just the word Ed. But as I worked through it and found other records, all of these variants were used for his first name. Whoever was recording made an assumption that the ED stood for either Edward or Edmund or Edwin. Now, as far as all of his signatures, it was always just Ed and nothing else. So was his name just Ed, or was it one of these three, or even a different version altogether? But don't make an assumption just because Ed could be common in your family for Edward, that that's in fact what Ed stands for. Also, don't expect you to find the same spellings as you go back in time. Don't assume that it's always going to be the same, even when you find a variant. So it's important, I feel, to do what I call develop your own knowledge base. Develop your own little handy book to help you with all of these variants as you find them and where you find them so that you can start checking them off when you're having problems. So first of all, get aware of local spelling, like that white with the QUH. So here's Pearson, and this is Scandinavian, Norwegian, and Sweden, and Denmark. And in some early versions, and when I'm saying early 1800s into the 1700s, it is spelled P-E-H-R-S-S-O-N most of the time. But as we come in time and forward, it starts to be variants into these versions. So Pearson, where they dropped out the H, and Peer then became Peter. And then Peter, somebody came up with this again, the peer or peer appear, but in English that could be spelled as P-I-E-R, and then the second S is dropped in the United States. So someone in Sweden whose baptismal record is spelled this way, when it comes to the United States Census, it could very easily be spelled this way or any other variant therein. It's always, how does it sound? All four of these versions sound the same. Then we have cultural patterns. Cultural patterns, and this is German, and it's very common in German records and custom to give the children more than one name. They might have, I don't know what's happening to my screen. Okay. Are we back, Anna?
I see the slides, but they're not in presentation view.
No, okay, I can change them. I don't know what happened. All my screen just went totally gray.
Oh, we never lost you over here.
Okay, that was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. So I actually want to go back and make sure, yeah, I missed, there's where I need to be. All right, so we are starting to talk about cultural patterns. And I was with the German name Frederick Albert, Wilhelm Albert. And in German custom, very often the child was only called by the second or third name. So someone with his full given name at baptism might be a Wilhelm or a William in English, or even an Albert. And so you have to be aware of that. And it makes German research quite difficult, because if they're called Albert once they get here or by the family, and you can't find Albert because the full name really is Frederick Wilhelm, sometimes you have to look at the names of the parents, you have to look at the siblings, you have to look at the place. There's a lot of workarounds here that you have to incorporate because of this very, very common German custom of giving a very long name to a child and then calling them one of these second or third names. It's not an easy solution. Another one is from the French Canadian, the Quebec, and most of the girls were given the first name Marie in honor of Mary, Jesus's mother. Most of the men were given the name Jean-Baptiste after John the Baptist. So they all had, most of them had this very first name, the same in the community, and then they had a second name. So she's Marie Alphonsine, but most often then after her baptism, her name is either written as M period, abbreviation for the Marie, Alphonsine, or most often just Alphonsine. Not to make the assumption that every girl in the family is a Marie, but it is very, very common. So I have three sisters, Alphonsine and her two sisters, all of whom came to the United States and settled in Marquette, Michigan, all of whom had the first name Marie, but don't make that assumption. Remember my first point. You can work with that idea, but don't assume it. It could very well be that she's an Alphonsine Josephine without the Marie in front of it. You'd have to match parents, place, etc. Then we have the commonality of most of the Scandinavian countries because these patronymic names were so common. All the men had the same first name and so on. So we have a patronymic Pearson, and there were so many Pearsons that as adults, after they were in the army, first of all, the army assigned a surname to them to keep them apart. And they were either a farm name where the farm they were from, or the name the army assigned to them. So a Johann Pearson, later in life, when he gets married and has children, he becomes John Hedberg. Again, this isn't an easy solution. You have to work back in time. And usually this is from the church records where you can get the solution to this. Church records, especially the Lutheran records of the three countries, have a lot of information in them. Even in this country, they follow the same forms. So usually that's how you will solve this kind of problem. But be aware of it. If they are Scandinavian and you see a name like this, don't make the assumption, but work on the probability that in an earlier version of that family name is going to be a patronymic. Then we have name variants. These become, here's our Jost, 1870 Roost, but also Yost with one O and Jost with one O. These are all from the various census of Chicago, not from the German records themselves, but from the census takers, the enumerators. Elizabeth is one of my favorite first names, given names, because there are so many variants for it. And I make a list of these, so I have a check-off list when I'm trying to decide if other variants to go look for. So for Elizabeth, we can even get Teddy and Bella and Bessie, and Queen Elizabeth is a Lilibet, and also her great-granddaughter. So you can see the variants here that you make a list of. This is what I'm calling a knowledge base. Keep track of these in some way. It can be a piece of paper, if that's the way you work. It can be a little note on your notepad and your phone or your pad, or it can be a database, whatever you want to do that works around the way you do your research. Handwriting. When you have an example of handwriting, you can see the date up here, April 12th, 1843, which is really quite recent in time, but you're having difficulty either because of dialect or because of language, or just because the handwriting isn't all that easy to read. Start looking for common letters or common ways to write, and then see if you can figure it out. So up here we have two words starting with the same first letter. And if you look at place names within this parish, you'll determine that that's an M. Down here, we have a very curvy end to the D. And as you take a look around the page, all of his Ds are written in that same way. Sometimes the scroll doesn't go all the way around, but you can make a note of that anytime I see that, I'm going to know it's a D. So then that may help me read the rest of the letter. And down here, even though this is 1843 in Scotland, he is using the double S format where it looks like it's an FS. So if you're unfamiliar with that, you would have to do that. But take a look at that and you'll go, okay, all of his double S's have this FS look to it, where regular S's are just this. This one really isn't all that hard to read, but it's the kind of example you need to do. And what I do is I take a photocopy or a print copy of whatever page, and then I'll sit and start analyzing, well, here's a word I can't read. What else on this page looks like it or looks like some of the letters? This is one way to set up a knowledge base of your handwriting for the period of time you're talking about and the recorder who's recording those church records. This is especially true for church records. So then with all of that, you create your own crib sheet. So here's an example of one that I've done. Here's surname as it is spelled today. And I made the note that the family pronounces it as Baisden with a long A sound. And then I have made a note of all of the variants that I have found for that surname and where I found it. So with the I, it's parish registers of Kent, England from 1715 to 1826. Then a double S instead of one S in one particular parish only and in one record only a marriage record of 1823. On another occasion, it's an E instead of the I, and again, it's one single parish and one record, a baptismal record of 1826. But you notice all of this is Kent. Then we have it as Basden, not Basden, but Basden with an added E. And this is not only in Kent, but also in Jackson County, Illinois, where the family moved in the 1830s. So we're now bringing it over to the United States with another variant. And then the 1850s, that E gets dropped by some members of the family. You notice I said this is current, to just the Basden form is the one I'm looking for. And this is various records in various Illinois, Missouri counties from the 1850s to the current. And then for some reason in the death records of Jackson County, 2 different death certificates, a Y is added. Now, this is really unusual because as I go back in time, that person, this death certificate that the person is for, they never spell their name with a Y, but the death record person, the recorder of that death certificate, added a Y to it in these 2 instances. So you can see what I mean about a crib sheet that I keep a little notebook of with all of my surnames. And since I'm an ex-librarian, they're in alphabetical order, but you could organize it any way you would be comfortable with. But the point is you keep track of these changes and these variants. So when I'm going to be looking for Basden in a record in Kent, I have the 3 versions here to go looking for, because if you go through even without, if you do not use wildcards, it would take 3 searches, but you can see where the wildcard would come in handy between the BA, and then a wildcard would replace all of these variants here. Okay, so that's some of the hints. And one of the other thing is on that crib sheet, always note the source of the name variation. Is it from a family story, like Aunt Pat? Or is it a census enumeration? Or is it from a document such as the baptismal certificate or a will? Even if it's a baptismal certificate, a will, and even if it's the person's signature itself, just remember that sometimes people change the spellings as they wrote their name. If it looked right, if it sounded right, it was right. And it was only until the government started saying it's got to be spelled this way do we get into the really firm spellings of our names. So now tips for successful searches. And we've got 10 minutes to do a lot. First of all, use those wildcards. Most of the websites will allow you to use one after 3 characters. So for Catherine or Kathleen, you can use variants like this. Forsyth sometimes has an E on it, so I always use an asterisk. But check the website itself for how they will allow you to use web wildcards. Ancestry uses an asterisk for 0 to 5 characters and a question mark for 1 character, not for soundex matches, and all searches must contain at least 3 non-wildcard letters. So you can use the wildcards, but you also must have 3 regular letters in your search. In family search, a wildcard is allowable in any part of the name, including as the first letter. So, but be careful, because if I do RBER, I'm going to get a lot of hits when I'm really looking for Kerber. Carl, Charles, well, both of these will work for that. This works for Margaret as well as Margie. You can see how you could use these. Going through this very quickly. Check the websites for how they will use wildcards. Be creative in your census searches. For each census search database, take a look at what is indexed and then search for just what is indexed. So use your first name and birthplace without a surname. If the surname is the problem, try a first name, birthplace, or the given name of the child, father, and or mother, again with no surname. Just the birthplaces, if the combination of birthplaces is unusual enough. First names only and include the siblings. and then look for a known neighbor. If you still can't find the family, you've got them in 1930. And if you can't find them in 1940 or in 1950 in less than a month, look for a known neighbor, somebody that's most likely to still be a neighbor 10 years later. Now, as an example, when I was looking for my great-grandfather's daughters in 1920, knowing most of them had married by that point, I did have a couple of unusual situations, so I did not put in a name. I used a birth date of 1875 plus or minus 5 years because they were all born between 1870 and 1880. They were all born in Illinois. Their father was born in Wisconsin, and their mother was born in Ireland. And the combination of these three birthplaces was unusual enough that I thought it would work. And I did come up with a lot of hits, but one of them was Laura Kay, and one of their daughters is Laura Catherine. And with this record, I found her second husband. I didn't even know she had married a second time after she was widowed. So that idea of using what was unusual about the family and about the person and not looking for the name brought me, I actually found all of the sisters that way. Say the name out loud. If you know how to say it, it's Wisniewski, and then now write what you just wrote down, what you said, Wisniewski. Instead of this, go look for this. That helps a lot. Add a silent H if it starts with a vowel. So instead of E-H-L-E-R, add the H. Same thing, by the way, these are all the same surname in the same family used at the same time over a period of years. They always never agreed on how this name was supposed to be spelled. And I'm not even sure how it's supposed to be pronounced. If it's Eiler or some variant of an umlauted O. But sometimes it was also with that silent H. The recorder wrote it with an H. Interchangeable vowels and double consonants. So Curran can be any of these forms. Morrison can be any of these forms. If the vowel is not important, the double letters are not important. If it is approximately the same spelling, it is probably the same name, with an emphasis on the word probably. Add or remove your silent letters. So the name today is spelled this way, D-U-P-R-A-S, but S is silent. So try looking for it with a wild card or start substituting other silent letters in French. This is a French name. Again, the cultural, the language is going to be important. So for the S, I can put in a T or a C or even a W. And in fact, all of these variants have appeared in the Quebec records for this family and often for the same person, these variants. Usually, though, it's going back in time. It's today, then the 19th century, 17th century, and then early into the 16th century. Prefixes and suffixes, add them or subtract them. So McFadden in Joliet, Illinois is Fadden in Maryport, Ireland. And sometimes MC can be abbreviated or it can have the Scottish form with the letter A. But this is totally very Irish. In the United States, for some reason, the Micks were added, but in Ireland, maybe because everybody was a Mick, they just used the name Fadden. Quickly through the websites. We have 7 minutes. For your given name, your first name, the best website I have found is Behind the Name. All of these URLs are in your handout. It gives you the names. You notice down here all of the variant languages. It has masculine and feminine, and there are more languages than this. So you can choose your appropriate language. Or just to see what happened, I'm going to go look for the name Sarah. So I type Sarah in that search box up here, and I get the answer that's Sarah. Now there's the name tab. There's a popularity tab, which will tell you over time how popular that was as a given name. We're going to look at related names, and then there might be comments from people. But Sarah is feminine. It's used in English, French, German, Hebrew, Arabic, Biblical, and Biblical Hebrew. It's written this way in Hebrew, this way in Arabic. This is in English, and it's pronounced English, French, German, Arabic, and so on. And then there's a little bit more in the way of pronunciation. Now, the best part of this particular website is you give it a name like Sarah, and you come over to related names, and now you get all of these variants. Here's English, French, German. Here's nicknames. Diminutive means nickname. So we have Sadie and Sal and Sally, Sarah in Hebrew, and all of these other forms of the name Sarah in various languages. Here's Yiddish, Polish, Hawaiian, Bosnian, and you can see the choices. I love this site when I'm working with families as we go back in time and they are immigrant families, and who isn't, and they didn't speak English. This gives me some ideas of variants I can go look for, not only in the church records or the arrival records or something like that, but also in the census and the newspapers. Newspapers become quite important because sometimes what you're looking for is in a foreign language newspaper. So this gives me the variants of those names. It's behind the name. It's a wonderful site. And I just go have fun with it. Look up names and see some of the variants. Then we have Cindy's list, and Cindy's list has a lot of information, but I'm just giving you two. She has an entire section on handwriting and script. And here's the first part of it. So we have Deciphering Old Handwriting, and she's got lists of abbreviations, but here's examples of letters in 17th century parish registers, and it looks like this. These are the capital letters. There's a small letter. And these look pretty much like A, except that one looks like an H to me. And look at the Q's and the N's. This one particularly is an N. If you come down here to the H's, a lot of those look like E's. It's actually an H with a tail below the line. So a chart like this, you can print it off and have it sitting next to you as you're trying to decipher that handwriting that you're looking at. This is Cindy's handwriting section. And then she also has a section on languages and translations. And under abbreviations, and there's other parts to this, but other abbreviations is a chart for the 19 most common abbreviations in German records. We also have abbreviations used in Finnish, Swedish, and Latin. And there's even a list of the postal and traditional state abbreviations if you need that. But these are the two that I thought would be most useful because those are the ones that most of us in some way, shape, or form get back into, the German or the Latin especially. At Family Search, the wiki gives you a lot of information. You go up to search, up the function search, and then you choose the wiki. And when that comes up here in the search bar, I've given you some ideas, but you're going to look for either the actual title of the record that you need to use. And I gave you this in your handout so you don't have to remember the phonetic substitution table, or the name of the country and the word names, or the actual language name itself, or the word handwriting for a subject. These are the way you would search out these articles. There's some examples of what you can get in the Family Search Wiki. There is a chart of Welsh patronymic names. So here's the Welsh patronymic. Remember, AB means son of, and here's what it became in English when the English started to write the names down. So Bevan for Ab Evan. We have Pew for Ab Hugh. You can kind of see where they come from. Down here we have Priest, Price, and Priest, and that actually translates as RHYS. It's a wonderful little chart if you're dealing with Welsh names. There's also a chart for personal names, which shows how that patronymic works. So John Evans, all of his sons have the surname Johns, but each of their children have the surname of their given name. So John Evans' son, Thomas, all of his children are Thomas, and so forth. You get charts like this all over the wiki at Family Search, and you can find a lot of information to add to your knowledge base what I was talking about earlier to help you with your searches and finding variants to go look for. They also have a commonly misread letters table, and you just type that into that search box and you'll get it. Commonly misread letters table. And so sometimes the A is really written as an HCO or is interpreted as an HCO. And again, the small a might be interpreted this way, or it could be just that's how the person spells it. So this chart really helps you find all the different variants. G, look at all your variants for G. Some of them on surface doesn't even make sense, SE, but in some records, that's how you're going to find it. Finally, the phonetic substitutes table, which is very similar to the previous one, but it's based on phonetics, how they sound. So remember I said the vowels can be totally interchangeable. So they even have the AU could be an OU, but here's a BP that could be PP, C as in catch, beginning, K, that can be all of this, CH, chin, can look like this, or we can have CHR, could be this, and it goes on. It's rather a long list. All of these are in the wiki, very easy to find and very, very helpful when you're trying to find alternates to go look for to find your spellings. And you can do it. So I don't know, we have just a few minutes for questions, Anna. Well, no, actually it's 7:01. That was very hard to get through.
No worries. It was a wonderful presentation. I don't see any questions yet, but I have just kind of a weird question. What's the weirdest name you've ever seen?
It's actually a very common name back in the 17th and 18th century German and came up into the 19th. But it's a woman's name, and now I can't come up with it. It starts with an H, and it's totally strange to me. It's Latin, and you look at it and you go Hippolyte or something like that, but it isn't even spelled that way. But that was the strangest one, but that's because I'm not with a German background. I'm dealing with Scots, Irish, and English. And we don't have unusual, common, strange names. So it's a cultural thing, I think, what you might think is strange.
That's fair. So no questions came in, so I'm going to share my screen. I see some comments coming in. Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was wonderful. And thank you everybody for attending this webinar. And we hope you will join us next week for our webinar on A Fresh Light on Newspapers with Dave Obie. And a recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.